Dan, it's great to have you here. What's it been like to talk with these people and hear some of the themes that we've explored in the last day together?
I found yesterday very inspiring. Something about being out here in the woods, away from the buzz of a city where conferences are usually held. I think it's helpful.
It was interesting when we spoke yesterday morning. You said that some themes had emerged simply from listening to all of you and listening to the speaker. Do you want to share with the audience what hit you yesterday?
Yes. Let's see. I'm getting a little echo here. Anyway, I think. But before that, okay. Thanks to Pam Weiss, we're going to have a little centering. Head, heart, body.
Yes.
Thank you, Pam. That was great yesterday. What I wanted to say before I forget is, I was good friends with Steve as freshmen in college. Years went by. We had like 5 years of a really good, close friendship. Then Apple started, and the rocket blasted off. And in the Apple phase, I was just a total peon. I was a self-taught engineer. Woz and Jobs were self-taught. I thought I could do that too. Anyway, this is really the first time I've been on a stage talking about Steve. And it's just a moment to reflect on, because my falling out with Steve had to do with him feeling his privacy violated. That story's been written many times, but anyway, so, and I've given many talks, but it was always about Apple products. The talk that I gave last year in Paris, I'll share with you the title because it's funny. It was Apple's Path to Galactic Domination, Part 1, The Early Years. that was the title I came up with. It was well received.
Dan, what I want to say is, we will talk about Steve today, but I somehow feel that these books were so significant to kind of the history that he helped shape.
Oh yeah, no, that's...
And he even shared that some of these were influential titles and so forth. So, I really understand the privacy thing, and I think it's so wonderful that you share this moment of history and how it fits into a later context.
Yeah.
And so it really is a privilege for you to be able to help us understand that. Yeah. Because really the point is, what will we learn from this and how will that affect us as we go forward?
All I'm saying is it's a little surrealistic for me.
Yeah.
I was not jumping at this chance to do this talk. It wasn't like material I had prepared in some way.
Right.
So I'm thanking you for encouraging me, because it's been a good process for me.
It has. It's been a wonderful process to learn more through you. So
yeah.
Really, from all at Dent, can we thank Dan? It's a very special thing. So, Dan, whenever we talk about this, we always come back to where it began, and it's with a remarkable book called Be Here Now. Do you want to recall some of your memories of why that book was significant and what it opened up for the two of you?
Yeah, that's really the starting point for the story. Reed College, I think we had a class of like 250. A little more than the number of people in this room, I guess. And so I would have met Steve anyway, just around campus. But as it happened, one of the guys I met the first day, who was a tall, skinny, cerebral guy from New York, he was in the same dorm as Steve. I was on the other side of campus. And so Lawrence Phillips, and one day he said to me, Daniel, you ought to come over to my dorm and meet this guy Steve. He's interesting. And so I went over, and actually he wasn't that interesting that day, but he had, so this is like really like second week of freshman year. It's kind of a magical time of life. First, away from home, I don't know, magical time of life. Steve had this giant reel-to-reel TAC tape deck, which was an expensive piece of gear, and I think he loved it. You know, I don't know how he paid for it or where he got it. And he had all these Dylan bootleg tapes, which were, okay, all these years later I found out it was Woz who brought him to Berkeley to the shop where you could buy the bootleg Dylan. Okay, mystery solved on that, but anyway. Steve was not particularly outgoing at the time, but he was thoughtful and had an open mind and an inquiring mind. And so, well, the next scene in our developing friendship was, I was always a voracious reader. I'm in the Reed College bookshop. I didn't have any money, but here's this weird book that just came out called Be Here Now, and it was only $3, which was in my budget. So I bought this book, and I'm reading it, and it just really was a phenomenal thing to read because it was a topic area of spirituality that I had never been exposed to at all in my hometown of Pelham, New York. I said I was a wide reader, but my parents didn't really have books, and I had never been exposed to spiritual literature.
How did it hit you?
Well, how many people here know this book? A few, not that many. I'll recap it a little bit. The story, right? It's a significant story. It should be a major feature film someday. So Richard Alpert is a psychologist at Harvard, colleague of Tim Leary. The two of them discovered psychedelics at the same time, and the rest is history, right? So, but then Tim went off to prison. They got fired from Harvard. They got fired from Harvard first. Tim goes to prison over a little piece of a roach, you know, for being the most dangerous man in America. And Richard Alpert kind of ran out of money and ran out of his flow, right? His flow kind of came to an end, and he was depressed and didn't know what to do. He went to India, had a little bottle of LSD, and his plan was to find a holy man and give him some LSD to see if that would supply an answer to what consciousness was all about. Isn't that a great story? Okay, great story.
What happened when he gave him the LSD?
And the story was, well, he ran across this hippie from Southern California named Bhagavan Das, who at some point said, "I'm taking you to see my guru." And so anyway, that's how Be Here Now starts. And it's a very easy read. You can read the first part of that book is I don't know, it's only 30 pages or something. You can read it in your lunch hour. And what happens is Ram Dass he's a very sophisticated psychologist, and he's not particularly open to anyone telling him anything. And this little guy in the blanket just blows his mind, by saying things to him that nobody could have known. And
reading him, telling him where he's been, what he's done.
Yeah, highly clairvoyant man.
Right.
And that's the beginning of the story. And so Richard Alpert turns into Ram Dass, and he writes this book. Now he's written a series of books. And of all the spiritual teachers from that era, this is 40 years ago, he's like the only one still alive.
It's interesting to say, Dan mentioned the first 30 pages of the book. The first 30 pages are sort of a recounting of what happened, but the rest of the book is beautifully illustrated craft paper that is really something of a magical mystery tour into the subconscious and into a sense of enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And it's as vividly illustrated in words as it is in images. So it does draw you into sort of a different plane, right?
Yeah.
You and Steve were both very curious young men. What did this make you curious about?
I would say first and foremost, it wasn't about yoga or meditation, and there wasn't that much of it even in the book. It was more about the fact that this guy was still alive, and there was a big crowd of Westerners following him, hundreds.
This guru was still alive.
Yeah, Neem Karoli.
Yeah,
That's his name, Neem
right.
Karoli Baba.
Mm-hmm.
And he traveled around, and he was well known in India, but until Be Here Now came out, he wasn't known at all in America. And it was just fascinating, mostly because it was fresh. It just came out,
Right.
and it was happening now. And so then, I don't know, Steve must have seen me carrying the book around, and we struck up a discussion about it, and I was eager to talk to anyone about this. I had never read anything like this. I read widely, and I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of science fiction, but I'd never been exposed to stuff like this. And anyway, so Steve and I had a mutual interest in these topics. And so then I started asking around, like, well, what else should I read? And someone suggested Autobiography of a Yogi. And that was a fascinating book, too. And then there was a series of books.
I want to zoom in on this because this book turned out to be one of the most, as I understand it, significant books in Steve's life. He reported that he read it every year, and in fact, at a very private gathering after his death, he had designed a gift for the people who participated, and each of them received, I think, a video and a copy of this book.
Yes.
What is this? You call this book about miracles. Will you tell more about that?
Well, it's an introductory book, and it's a kind of a rosy view of spirituality and miracle stories, making it accessible to the general public, which is what Yogananda was so good at doing. And I actually was surprised that Steve, late in life, I would have thought he would have been giving away copies of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I thought that was the book that he really liked better. But I don't know. The Autobiography of a Yogi, it's kind of rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah.
And you read some of those miracle stories about all the perfume flavors, the perfume
Right.
scents that mysteriously appear. That's, you know.
I want to introduce the audience to it for a moment because this really is a book about, as you say, miracles, but it's about using the power of mind, mastery of mind, to do things like bilocate, be in two locations at one time, to travel actually through space or time through the power of mind, to create or manifest physical objects, smells, visions, ephemeral, experiences, simply through that will and determination. And you told me when you and Steve first read this that you both were a little bit skeptical, right?
Oh, definitely skeptical.
So what do you think changed?
What do you mean changed?
Well, that he came back, he read this 30 times in his life.
Oh, I don't believe that at all.
He said
he just wanted to, I don't know. I don't think, Steve was not a huge reader anyway, but it meant,
Right.
no, I mean, I was more of a book person,
were,
but when I say he wasn't a huge reader, he had a very inquiring mind, and he devoured books the same way I did.
Right.
That's why we were friends.
Right.
And he didn't buy many books. Mostly it was me buying books.
Right.
And he and I would share them and read them together and talk about them. That was the basis of our friendship.
Yeah.
So anyway, I would say after just those first two books, Be Here Now and Autobiography of a Yogi, we were kind of hooked. At this, all these, we're talking many types of phenomena, and really, technically, you would say these are siddhis, powers that an adept guru or a yoga
Master.
yes, a yoga master would develop, and we were just fascinated by that. And who wouldn't be?
Right.
I don't know.
So, looking at this list, Dan compiled a list and has offered to share it with the Dent community. So we'll make sure that happens. But the books here, the titles read like Shankara's Crest Jewel of Discrimination by, you're going to have to help me with this, Prabhava Manda.
Oh, he just translated it.
He translated it.
Yeah.
Barefoot in the Heart, Remembering Neem Karoli, which is Guruji, right?
Yes.
So these are books that really explore a number of different ways of entering that realm of consciousness and enlightenment. How do you think, even skimming these books, right? Because a lot of these were the ones that you shared, but even for Steve to skim them, how did that hack his concept of reality?
Well, we're 18 years old. We don't know what reality is. I mean, it's like what's out there, right? Just to clarify here, the short list of the books that Steve and I definitely shared and read together is maybe the first 20.
Right.
Okay, and I didn't even have them collected anywhere. I mean, this is 40 years ago. I have a lot of books in my house. I love books, and they were scattered all over my house. And then when Steve passed, I started thinking, well, maybe I should like collect these books in one place. But really, oh yeah, the other part of the story I wanted to tell was, so Jonathan Rothenburg, young kid he was 18 when he met Steve. He was the founder of the Boston Computer Society. And Jonathan has written a book called Steve Jobs, My Buddhist Teacher. We can roll our eyes a little. And he came to visit me at my house, and I was looking at I liked his manuscript, actually.
Right. I read it too. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's good. Well, it's genuine. He was genuinely inspired by Steve. Yeah. And when I was talking to him, I was thinking, well, people have been saying to me for years that I should write a memoir of our trip to India, 4-month-long trip to India. But really nothing that earth-shaking happened. And I will write this, but it's like only a chapter. It's not a whole book.
Can we pause for, who would be interested in reading such a thing? Show of hands? Okay, good. That's some pretty good
well, Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse. I read that in high school. That's kind of the story. It's the Journey to the East.
Right.
It's also the Siddhartha story, right? Journey in search of spiritual wisdom. Anyway, let's see. I think I'm losing my thread here.
Well, we were talking about reality, and you said at 18, you don't have much of a sense of
reality. No. I was saying how this book list came about. So I was talking to Jonathan Rothenburg, and I thought, well, actually, now that Steve has passed, sad to say, I'm really the only one who knows what all those books were that he was reading.
Right.
And that's clearly of cultural interest.
Right.
Many people want to know that.
Yes.
And that's when I thought, oh gosh, that's a book. I could write that book.
Right.
I haven't really started yet, but the first step was gathering all the books.
The material.
So that's taken the last couple of years.
Right.
So, because I have books scattered all over my house, and so I've been, and there were some that I couldn't find that I ordered, so they were bought more recently. But anyway, you filmed that bookshelf where I collected all these books.
Yes.
And now that it's a list of 100 books, that's kind of cool.
It's very cool.
And anyway, so that's what we're here talking about. And to the extent that I have all these books and I can pick any one of them off the shelf and review it now, I feel like that's been a worthwhile process.
I want to ask a question, because I know many people wonder, Steve Jobs, how did he get to be Steve Jobs? Was it nature or was it nurture? So I have a little bit of a chicken and egg question about these books. Was Steve drawn to these books because of his nature and something in his curiosity, something in sort of the paradox that you describe as being? Or were these books perfectly timed to help shape him as the individual he would later become? Was he drawn to them because of something innate, or were they books that actually shaped and influenced him?
Oh, I think they did shape him somewhat. I think it was just a mix of things. I mean, freshman year of college, exposed to a lot of things. Right. And Steve had an interesting story with respect to college, too, because he dropped out the first month, got all his money back, and then proceeded to stay there for a year and a half, auditing classes, which was, at the time I didn't really question it, but it was an very odd thing.
Audacious thing to do.
Well, it makes you think, he had some sense of the course his life would take that was not going to require a degree. I sure didn't share that sense.
But you've mentioned some other things that happened even earlier that showed he thought differently about himself. You described a late night in Los Altos when he went and pounded on a very interesting door. Do you want to share that story with the audience?
Yes. Okay. So chronologically, that was actually the next year. That was in '73. That's a good story. So, well, actually, let me step back a bit. So the 5 themes that I came up with. Right. So there's 100 books on that list. Right. We're not going to talk about we've talked about the 2 main books. anyone can, I'll post the list somewhere. You can look at the list of books, but we don't have time to talk about any more books. The themes that I liked were curiosity, intelligence, enlightenment, ambition, and paradox. And those were the kind of main themes that came up for me while I was thinking about all this material. Okay, so on the theme of enlightenment, well, anyway, so we have these first two books. Now, Steve is the one who came across Cosmic Consciousness, which is an anthropological book written 100 years ago by Richard Buck, who I'd never heard of. No, he hasn't been well heard. He didn't write that many more books. And I never there was no Wikipedia then. I didn't know his history. But it was quite a fascinating book. Really, really fascinating.
It is
book.
fascinating.
Yeah.
What it basically says is you can use, this is what I took from it, the power of mind to become something of an astral being and evolve yourself in your lifetime to a higher plane of consciousness. And he gives stories of people who have done it.
It's a kind of an anthropological survey. The way I would describe it is, he is saying that, I don't know if he coined the term cosmic consciousness. I think he did. And you could relate that to enlightenment of some flavor, but his premise was that this is an emerging evolutionary direction for us as a species. That is a you don't find that in any of the other Indian spiritual stuff. It's fascinating. It's an anthropological point of view, like what Darwin would have been thinking about.
The evolution of consciousness.
And so he lists a whole bunch of historical figures who demonstrated some kind of what he would call cosmic consciousness, various symptoms. And he talks about how, it seems to be emerging in the early 30s. And then he relates it to the development of color vision, which is kind of a purely anatomical thing. And how color vision, it's pretty well known, even in biblical times, color vision was not that well developed. There's a whole there's a whole bunch of material on that. Anyway, so Cosmic Consciousness, fascinating book. I think, here's what happened. I think Steve got a hold of that book and decided he was enlightened. Because I'm sure he didn't decide it based on Autobiography of a Yogi, right? So, and then I was talking with a woman who's writing a biography of Kobun Chino. Kobun was Steve's Zen teacher, Zen master. And
who Pamela also shared as a master.
Yes, right? And Steve and I went and visited Kobun many times in 1975, 1976. Anyway, this woman who's writing a biography of him told me about a video she had seen that Kobun gave, a video interview somewhere, I don't know where we can find it, in which Kobun tells the story of how he met Steve. Steve knocks on his door. And Kobun's a family man in Los Gatos, but he runs the Los Altos Zendo. He lives behind the Zendo. And Steve shows up at his house at like 11 o'clock at night, ringing the doorbell. And Kobun comes to the door, and there's this wild-eyed 18-year-old kid, barefoot, torn jeans, saying, "I've got to talk to you, I've got to talk to you." And Kobun says, "Well, he didn't look dangerous." So I thought I could talk to him, but come back tomorrow. And so then Steve comes back the next day, and they have a little meeting. And in Kobun's words, this young kid comes to me and he goes, "Kobun, you've got to help me. I'm enlightened and I don't know what to do." Which is really funny. That is really funny, because no matter whose definition of enlightenment you take, not knowing what to do does not include, right? I mean, this kind of goes with the definition. If you're enlightened in some sense, then you have a bigger view of your life and you know exactly what to do. And so that's just funny. It's kind of pure Steve. I'm sure it's a true story.
It seems like a very true story.
Kobun wouldn't have made that up.
No, not at all. It's funny, though, when we look at the book Cosmic Consciousness and you juxtapose that to Think Different and some of the qualities that he called out, and even looking at his Stanford speech, both of them really speak about kind of finding a connection with something that's much more intrinsic than the usual external messages that we get. And looking at Steve's life, even from a distance, you saw it much closer and many different points, but even my limited experience with him shows he was much more compass-driven, internally driven, than he was map-driven externally. How does that ring to you based on the Steve you know?
The main thing I would say is that although I had a close relationship with Steve and we discussed many things as good friends do, I did not know till many years later that in his last year of high school, he was making and selling blue boxes with Woz, which was illegal, but it was also a product. And Steve and Woz both say if it hadn't been for the blue box, there might never have been an Apple at all, because that was the partnership that got them working together in a successful way. Well, isn't that fat? That's really interesting. Steve was a guy who he kept things private. He was a private guy. He had his cards close to his chest, in the gaming metaphor. And so years later, I just thought, that is very bizarre that he never, ever said a word about the blue boxes. I would have been interested. I was interested in electronics, but I had no background in electronics. Anyway, so Steve, so here's another anecdote for you on the topic of ambition.
Yes. Because you described that as a key driver for him. He was always ambitious, right?
Yes, from a very early age. And Chris-Ann, his high school girlfriend, when I came out to the West Coast, Steve, Chris-Ann, and I all rented a house together and lived together for a year and a half. Chris-Ann got pregnant and moved away because Steve was cruel to her. He was cruel to her. Anyway, delivered her baby up at the farm in Oregon. Chris-Ann told me one day that Steve had said to her in high school that he was going to be rich and famous. And that just floored me. I never saw that in him. Like the friend that I knew from college. I just never saw that he was particularly ambitious. He really kept that hidden. But I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it's true. And so you offered the others. I had never heard the story that Claire, his mother, didn't hold him after he was adopted.
For the first, it's something that she felt very torn about, is that because his birth mother sued to reclaim him back only days after she had given Steve up for adoption. She regretted her decision and began a lawsuit. And Clara was terrified that she would lose him, and so she was afraid to hold him. And if you think about that in terms of what they call Russian orphan syndrome, it actually plays into something in cognitive development and actually nervous system development, the touch, the holding. And she felt she had never held him enough and felt part of her burden in life was that he had been damaged by that attachment disorder at an early age.
I think that makes perfect sense.
It's a fascinating insight.
So here it is, 40 years later. I never heard that story, but connecting the dots.
Connecting the dots.
So anyway, I think Steve clearly was very ambitious at a very early age in a very kind of secretive inner way as part of his psyche.
Is it possible that things that mattered to most people simply didn't matter to Steve, and things that mattered to Steve simply didn't matter to a lot of other people?
Well, he was secure enough in his own mind and perceptions of the world that he didn't, from a fairly early age, he was self-confident. He wasn't really outgoing, but he didn't really care what anybody thought. And yesterday, when I was spending hours in the airport waiting for my next flight, I was reading Bob Dylan's Autobiography, and Bob Dylan says the same thing.
What did he say, Dan?
Well, there was a couple things. It's the book Chronicles. Lovely book, really, really great book. And he says his mind was strong like a trap, and he didn't need any advice from anyone. And even though he had nothing and he was sleeping on couches, he had a sense of his own destiny. And that reminded me of Steve.
Very much so.
Yeah.
One of the things in the Isaacson book, Steve speaks of quieting and slowing his mind and being able to see much more than could be seen before. When you think about Steve as a person who was able to focus his mind and have sort of that very intentional practice, did you see glimmers of that in your early time together, or do you feel it was something he evolved through his later life path?
I would say I didn't see, well, like I said, in our early friendship, there was never any discussion of technology in any way. We were both very interested in science. And so the questions, the issues raised by Neem Karoli and the stories in Autobiography of a Yogi, okay, so we're talking clairvoyance, telepathy, reincarnation, and these are still fascinating topics. Here's 40 years later, we know a lot about the brain now. We know there's still no good theory of consciousness. There's certainly no theory of any kind about reincarnation, although we have many stories.
Right.
You know.
Well, you asked Steve in 2009, you said you asked him about reincarnation. Do you want to share what he said?
Well, yes, it was a rare, I had a falling out with Steve. He didn't talk to me for 15 years. It was harsh.
It's really hard. Yeah.
It was harsh. Anyway, actually, so this is, I'll just give you the, I don't know if we're running out of time, but the background of the story was Albert Hofmann, because Steve had made statements about LSD multiple times, Albert Hofmann wrote a personal letter to Steve soliciting funding for psychedelics research. And I know Rick Doblin of MAPS. I think Rick Doblin probably suggested this to Albert Hofmann. And I offered to deliver it as a peace offering to Steve. I knew Steve would feel honored.
Yeah.
I knew he would. And I offered to deliver it. And as it worked out, I ended up just introducing Rick to Steve, and they had several conversations. Steve never gave him any money, but he got the letter, and I'm sure it meant something to him. And so then I get a call from Steve at 7 in the morning. I'm completely sound asleep. And Steve apologizes and says, well, I'm sorry, but this is the only free time I have all day. And we chatted for 20 minutes. It was a nice conversation. And at some point I said, well, Steve, you've had a very interesting life now. This is 2009. The iPhone's already a huge success. And I said, what do you think now about reincarnation? And he goes, 50-50. which is more skeptical than me at this point. What I think, after my bizarre life, I never would have predicted my life at all. And I am completely at a loss to account for it. Even under a theory of karma. And then I read Bernie Weiss and all those stories. If I got the name right, Bernie Weiss?
Yeah.
Anyway, Many Lives,
Many
Many
Lives, Many
Masters.
Masters,
Yeah.
right.
I think there's, we live our lives based on a model of what we think is happening.
Right.
Which could be a very big model depending on what you've read. And really, whatever story makes sense to make your life snap into a picture, that's the thing to go with. And if it includes reincarnation, who cares? That's what I think now.
Right.
And I have a very dear friend who passed away last summer, age 59, of a heart attack. But he always was talking about his past lives. So that's what I said to his mother, this is really sad, but maybe it's some small comfort that now he'll be talking about his past life from Palo Alto. Anyway.
It's really hard to be out of time with you, Dan,
Oh,
but
yeah.
of course we want to honor the clock.
All right.
We do have one kind of a special moment to share. It would be great to be able to continue this conversation with you, so thank you so much. We didn't even get to talk about your opinion on whether or not you think Steve found enlightenment in his life, so maybe we'll save that for another time.
That is going to have to be a whole nother...
That's another conversation.
Several more conversations.
Well, again, I can tell you there would be no one better to explore that, I think, than you. So thank you so much for this time. And now we have kind of a special surprise.
Wait. We're going to have a closing thought here.
A closing
That's what I told
thought?
you.
Do it.
I did a television show for years. I always would have a good closing thought.
He wants a good closing thought.
So here's my closing thought. As I look over this list of 100 books, which represent a lot of cultural history relating to spiritual growth and enlightenment, I thought, well, how would we sum this up? Steve's gone, but if he was alive, we could have this conversation about what we think now, 40 years later. And if I think about summarizing all the different cultural paths about enlightenment, I like the Dalai Lama's famous quote, "What's my religion? My religion is kindness." That's the Dalai Lama. Thank you very much. And kindness is not really a word many of us would associate with Steve in his later life. Although he got kinder in his later life, but in his earlier years, he was often cruel. He was cruel to me in a certain way. And, but here's the thought I liked. The Steve that I knew as a freshman in college, who I traveled around India with, he was kind. He was kind. So I like that thought as a closing thought. Okay. I will put it somewhere.
We'll make sure.
Well, we'll do a post, it'll be in your email newsletters too.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure
Let's
we
do
get
it
that
that
all
way.
up. Anyway, thank you. And Ellen. Before we break, there's a little ceremonial thing. So we were packing up the Buick Enclave coming from Seattle. And we got tons of stuff and the dog and vintage skis and the thing. And I'm like, oh, there's one thing. If we have room for it, I really want to bring it because Daniel's going to be here. And the nice thing about the Enclave, if I do a shameless plug, is we're all done. We're all packed. It's like, oh, yeah, there's plenty of room. And I threw it in.
Good.
What it is...
You have the modern case, not the
Yeah,
old
no,
case.
I have the other case, but the bigger case is good for wine also. Is Mark Hamburg here? Yeah, Mark remembers this because several years ago, this is a Mac 128K that I bought new in 1984, the spring of '84. And I, of course, kept it because it's a piece of art, functional art. And at a conference I did with Mark Hamburg years ago, I had Bill Atkinson autograph it. And then Steve Wozniak was up in Seattle with Robert Scoble, and I had him autograph it. And I was hoping I could talk you into autographing it.
Oh, that's an easy call.
All right, well, let me...
We're just sad that Burl Smith can't be here because he was the designer. I designed only tiny parts of the logic board, but I was the person who built all the prototypes. And this was built in a factory, so I didn't personally turn the screws on that one, but I built...
got any of those prototypes?
I do. There's a totem pole of them at my home.
I've always liked you, Daniel. All right, what I'll do is I'll give you this.
Okay, maybe I'll stay sitting because...
And I'll give you this.
Here we go.
And then we'll let folks document this
see.
moment.
Let's tip this a little
Yeah.
bit. I don't want to mess this up. There you go.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, so what just got finished is the IEEE milestone. There's going to be a bronze plaque placed somewhere in Silicon Valley about the Macintosh and all the things that were revolutionary about it. And my name was briefly in it and then got taken out. I'm not, well, because building all the prototypes, I wasn't one of the designers particularly, but
Well,
it was very gratifying to be part of that team. Very special
I
time
can
in
imagine,
history.
and it's very gratifying to
Yeah.
have you do this for us.